Good evening, I'm Hanomansing at Vancouver International Airport. Tonight we dig into the environmental cost of travel as world experts try to reach a climate deal. From the streets to the back rooms.
And behind closed doors, there's some really serious conversations.
A sense that time is running out. And were all those flights to COP26 worth it?
Aviation is pretty much anyone's biggest personal carbon footprint.
What to consider before booking that next vacation. Ready to reopen.
Any progress like that is really exciting.
Vaccinated travelers will be able to cross the U.S.-Canada land border, but still need a negative test to come home. Investigating a deadly concert crush.
People were pushing me. I don't know how my knees were scraping on the ground.
The lives lost and a message from the man on stage. Canadians say they want to make the switch.
Next car, I'm going for electric car.
But only 4% have. What would it take to get more people driving electric? This is The National. And welcome to a special edition of The National from Vancouver International Airport. Travel is starting to take off again, but there will be an environmental impact. Just one transatlantic flight can have the same emissions per passenger as a family's gas-powered car for a whole year. As part of our commitment to covering the story of our changing planet, tonight we focus on the impact of travel and transport. I should point out I've been given permission by YVR to have my mask off here, the terminal, well ventilated, and I'm distanced from other people. So much of the economy revolves around getting people and goods from one place to another. And the more we move by air, sea, or land, the further away we get from our climate targets. That is a challenge confronting COP26 in Glasgow, where Chris Brown shows us world leaders have left and delegates are getting down to the small but difficult details that could make or break this summit.
The theme of the street protest in Glasgow Sunday was thriller, with ghoulish characters trying to draw attention to the real-life horror show they say climate change poses. Activists and civil society groups took to the streets all weekend, warning delegates that failure in the coming week is not an option.
I come from the Philippines and I am an indigenous person from the mountains. And this is personally important to me because climate change is killing my people.
There have been successes, agreements on halting deforestation, reducing methane, phasing out coal, and financing climate goals. But none are airtight.
From week 2, I'm expecting that we will hear more from those who are living up to their commitments, like what they call the producer countries, the less developed countries, and make us a real part of the agenda.
Veteran COP watcher Alden Meyer expects talks will turn to compensating poorer nations for the impact of historical emissions.
And that's why it's being resisted so hard by the U.S. and other developed countries, Europe and Canada and others. They don't want to be on the hook for more money. But the reality is they have a responsibility. We largely created this problem.
Someone who's been in the corridors and back rooms of COP is former Liberal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna. She says the pressure on national delegations to give and take can be tremendous.
I would just be banging my head on the table at about 3 a.m. wondering, are we going to get a deal? And then behind closed doors, there's some really serious conversations. Often outside actors are playing a role.
The smaller nations here are challenging the larger, big polluting countries to come back this week and raise their ambition. If they won't commit to further reducing their emissions now, then at least declare when they'll have new plans. Chris Brown, CBC News, Glasgow.
The obstacles at these summits are political, but the reality of climate change is scientific. And Johanna Wagstaff is looking at the role that science will play in the coming days.
Ian, here in Glasgow today, you could almost feel the city take their literal rest day, other than the football match, as we gear up for week 2 of negotiations. Here's what I'll be watching for in the days ahead. First of all, the IPCC science report will be the backbone of the talks. Heads of state, after their fanfare pledges, have all left, and now it's up to negotiators and ministers to work out those details. And it is a grueling process. My experience from previous COPs has shown that tensions run high, little sleep, and countries' priorities going head to head. But scientific advisors will be there, helping to close that gap between pledges and keeping warming below 1.5. Currently, the latest science says that current pledges have our emissions rising 16% by 2030. In order to keep warming below 1.5, we need to drop emissions 45% by 2030. Number 2, accountability. The credibility of countries already on the line after Paris as temperatures and emissions continue to rise. But satellite technology may be the game changer. We now have the technology to track global greenhouse gas emissions in real time, putting the ownership and accountability back on individual countries and businesses. This is something that former Vice President Al Gore was pretty excited about last week, borrowing one of my favorite quotes.
There's an old cliche that I'm sure you've heard a million times, you can only manage what you can measure. With the ability to accurately measure how many emissions are coming from what location, and then determine who is responsible for those emissions, that changes everything.
Number 3, grassroots solutions. Today, the People's Summit for Climate Justice kicked off. Over the next 4 days, they'll be amplifying voices, ideas, and solutions from communities around the world, hoping to ignite more ambition in global leaders. And it'll be exciting to see what solutions they offer and if those can help close that gap to 1.5. Either way, Ian, we'll find out exactly how close we get in about 5 days.
Johanna Wagstaff in Glasgow. Even going to COP26 means making a climate choice. The emissions from taking a single flight are significant.
In just a few hours, you can eliminate anything that you tried to do for the last years in terms of being kind to the environment.
Coming up later in the show, I'll talk to 2 climate activists about whether it's better to take climate action by staying away from Glasgow. To other news now. Late tonight, for the first time in more than a year and a half, the U.S. border is reopening to non-essential travelers. It's a change people have been waiting for on the road back to normal. But as Tally Ricci shows us, there's one more that many say needs to come.
There's about to be a lot more movement on both sides of border crossings like this.
Any progress like that is really exciting. You know, our entire industry, our entire economy is really looking forward to getting back to normal.
The U.S. is reopening its land borders with Canada for people who are vaccinated. Those crossing into the U.S. won't need a COVID-19 test. But to cross back into Canada, they'll need proof of a negative PCR test done within the previous 72 hours. Those tests can cost hundreds of dollars.
We're not going to be taking any chances with the health and safety of Canadians. So it could take a little bit more time, and people are just going to need to plan accordingly.
The federal government has been under pressure to drop the pricey test requirement.
All of these border policies are being actively looked at the moment.
The last very important piece is the elimination of the PCR test.
The border opened to American tourists in August, but businesses in Niagara Falls say the test is still a barrier.
They didn't see an influx of Americans coming when the border opened up, again because of having to come into Canada and have to come with a negative test.
While the streets are more lively now than they were last year, some say pre-pandemic normal still feels distant.
So we know that although we partially opened things up, it's not enough. People are like water. They'll take the path of least resistance.
Unvaccinated travelers can continue to cross the U.S. border for essential reasons like trade and transport. However, by January, essential travelers will be required to be fully vaccinated. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Niagara Falls.
So as you just heard, some are frustrated with the PCR testing requirements that remain. And for more on that, let's bring in infectious disease specialist Dr. Susie Hoda. And Dr. Hoda, how useful are these PCR testing requirements at this moment in the pandemic when you consider the vaccination rates and the case rates that we're seeing?
Well, it is questionable, really, and it's hard to get empiric data on just how well these testing strategies have worked in capturing cases at the border. I mean, we want to keep things as safe as possible for travel, but at the same time, the PCR test you take at 72 hours before you cross the border reflects your status at that time only. And so people can incubate virus and bring it into the country without realizing it.
What do you think needs to happen in the coming weeks or months in order for those testing requirements to be dropped? What sort of things will you be watching for?
Well, the overall case counts in the U.S. have been dropping, but there are some hotspots that still have increasing or higher than we'd like case counts. And so I think seeing some stability and reduction in the cases would be helpful. But also the vaccination rates in the U.S. are lower than they are in Canada by, about almost 20%. So, it's trying to see some better vaccine coverage, which I do think will be helped as well by having the younger age groups vaccinated.
Dr. Hoda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the U.S., an investigation is underway after a weekend concert tragedy in Houston. The crowd rushed the stage, leaving at least 8 people dead and hundreds more hurt. As Magda Gebersalasa shows us, survivors are trying to figure out what happened.
A growing memorial marks the site of Friday's deadly music festival in Houston, while the memories haunt those who survived it.
10 feet away from me was 2 people without a pulse.
People were pushing me. I don't know how my knees were scraping on the ground.
Videos on social media show the chaos and confusion. A crowd surge, people passing out, others being crushed and trampled. In the end, 8 people between the ages of 14 and 27 died. Among them, college student Franco Patino, who was majoring in mechanical engineering, and 14-year-old John Hilgert, a former baseball coach of his, said he was an angel.
I just want to send out prayers to the ones that was lost.
Travis Scott, the founder of the festival, was on stage. At one point, Drake even joined the performance. Meanwhile, in the crowd, things took a tragic turn. Scott is now speaking out.
I'm honestly just devastated.
How this happened and specifically what caused the crowd to surge is something police are trying to figure out.
This is now a criminal investigation that's going to involve our homicide division as well as narcotics.
He said also part of that is looking into the alleged drugging of a security officer. Meanwhile, questions are swirling around why the performance continued to go on. This 18-year-old was seen shouting at a cameraman to stop the show.
He was trying to tell him that there was people underneath there dying.
Victor Cruz says that is his son. Prior to this, he says the teen was crushed by the crowd, falling under the pressure.
Just knowing that my son almost didn't make it home, and then the ones who didn't, I just really feel for them.
A sentiment shared by those who continue to show up where it all went so terribly wrong. Magda Gebersalasa, CBC News, Washington.
For the first time since May, flags have been raised at all government buildings across the country. The flag over the Peace Tower on Parliament Hill raised late this afternoon. The flags were initially lowered on May 30th after the discovery of unmarked burial sites at a former residential school site in Kamloops, British Columbia. They'll be lowered again at sunrise tomorrow to mark Indigenous Veterans Day before being raised again tomorrow night ahead of Remembrance Day ceremonies. Speaking today on Rosemary Barton Live, Indigenous veteran John Moses says he approves of the government's decision to raise the flags.
I concur with the course of action that has been taken. The flag will be raised once again permanently at the conclusion of the ceremony on Thursday. I agree with that. It being understood, however, that their matters will be expedited relative to the implementation of remaining Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action.
The government is also committed to lowering the flag every September 30th to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and says it will work with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation to find a place to fly the orange survivors flag. A hot, dry summer in Manitoba has pushed many farmers to the brink. They're concerned about what a change in climate means for the future. And as Marina von Stackelberg explains, many are warning without significant snowfall this winter, they could be in serious trouble by spring.
Dairy farmer David Weens has never dealt with a drought like this. His family has been raising cows for 3 generations.
The cows are the absolute priority, and if we can't get feed for our cows, then we would simply have to reduce the herd, and of course then you're reducing production, and no one wants to go there.
For now, Weens counts himself lucky. He's still able to feed his herd.
We'll still be okay that way for this winter, but it's going to be close. Now, our really big concern at this point is, well, you can see how dry it is outside.
Dry weather that's plagued the prairies since the summer. A drought so severe, farmers couldn't grow crops to feed their animals. The price to buy feed went through the roof. Some sold their livestock off. And now any moisture left in the soil is pretty well gone. Snow is needed, and lots of it.
If the system isn't recharged, then very likely we're going to have a real crop disaster on our hands. Not just a crop disaster, but it's going to be a disaster for the entire economy.
The amount of water flowing through Manitoba's Assiniboine River is half of what it should be for this time of year. Rivers and lakes across the province are reporting historic water lows, and it's not getting any better.
If we do not get an above average snowfall this winter, we are going to be in terrible shape come spring. You would have to go back to the 1930s to see something this severe.
Weens says farms are much better at dealing with drought than they were in the Great Depression. They can weather bad seasons, but he worries what will happen if this continues. Climate change is making it harder to know what the future looks like.
One wonders, is this a new normal, or is this another one of those cycles?
Despite the uncertainty, he's optimistic rain and snow will come. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, near Grunthal, Manitoba.
We have an update tonight on a CBC News investigation into the suspected use of North Korean forced labor in clothes carried by Reitmans. The Canadian retail giant now says it's pulling all connected inventory from its stores. Friday's episode of CBC's Marketplace revealed that over a decade, Reitmans bought 100 shipments of clothing from a Chinese factory on the North Korean border, but no more. In a statement, Reitmans says they were unaware of the conditions at that factory. It says they've cut ties and will give all remaining product made there to various charities. Over the course of the pandemic, many people have said they've grown closer to their pets. One family spared no expense to take their beloved dog when they moved overseas, but it didn't turn out as planned, and she reached out to Go Public. Diane Buckner reports.
This was Scarlett's favourite place.
Emma O'Farrell is talking about her dog, Scarlett, an 8-year-old Bernese mountain dog. The family was moving back to the UK, and Air Canada bookings for large animals must be made through pet transportation companies. Worldwide Animal Travel promised to handle all transport logistics. Cost $4,800. It was a 30-hour journey for Scarlett, including wait times at the Toronto and London airports.
When she arrived in the UK, she was unable to walk, basically.
Emma saw through a video chat app that her husband had to carry the dog into the house. The company told the family to give Scarlett some time to recover. 2 weeks passed, no improvement. Emma's husband took the dog to a local vet.
He actually signed the euthanasia papers that evening.
The family was heartbroken when it was recommended Scarlett be put down. The O'Farrells can't understand what happened. Scarlett did take medication for arthritis, but prior to her trip, she had to have a checkup here at her local vet clinic and was declared fit to travel. In an email to Go Public, Worldwide Animal Travel said Scarlett was tendered to the airline, she flew, and arrived safely at London Heathrow Airport. Air Canada told the O'Farrells that the dog was unsteady getting out of the kennel, but no other health issues were flagged by British authorities.
There's only a handful of incidents.
A spokesperson for the International Pet Travel Association says 2.2 million animals fly in a typical year. Complications are rare.
If the dog passed a health exam and it was in good health when it was transported, there shouldn't be an issue.
O'Farrell acknowledges that the journey may have been too much for an older Bernese and wants other pet owners to think twice before shipping a pet overseas.
But I would never want another family to have to go through what we've had to go through.
$5,000 later, few answers and no dog. Diane Buckner, CBC News, Toronto.
If you have a story to share or a tip you'd like Go Public to look into, you can email them directly, gopublic@cbc.ca. Quebec voters took part in municipal elections today, and in Montreal, the incumbent, Valérie Plante, has won re-election as mayor. It is the second time that Plante has defeated a former mayor and former federal cabinet minister, Denis Coderre. Coderre was the incumbent when he lost in 2017. Plante is Montreal's first female mayor. During the campaign, she promised to focus on climate change and to build more social housing. Many of us are eager to finally get on a plane, but climate activists are asking you to think twice.
If you take one flight, to offset it, you would have to become vegetarian for 4 years.
Coming up, I'll speak with two environmentalists who are facing a dilemma: fly to Glasgow or avoid the emissions. And on the roads, one group of students is working to convert old gas guzzlers and make them greener.
When I have kids, I want to be able to tell them that I was part of the solution to climate change.
But first, remembering a man who brought a unique sound to the 80s. Nicaraguans voted in a presidential election dismissed as a sham and a parody by outside observers. Longtime authoritarian President Daniel Ortega is expected to easily win a fourth term alongside his wife, who's also the vice president. Ortega had ordered the arrests of dozens of political opponents, journalists, and activists in the months before the vote. As conflict between government and rebel forces in Ethiopia continues to grow, Canada is pulling non-essential embassy staff and staff members' families out of the country. It's urging other Canadians to consider leaving too. Fighting started in the Tigray region a year ago. Thousands have been killed, and the area is now in a hunger crisis. A well-known Inuk artist has been memorialized in the nation's capital. Annie Putagu was noted for her pen and pencil drawings of life in northern Canada before her mysterious death at the age of 46. Today, on International Inuit Day, an Ottawa park was named in her honor. Rafi Bujikanian was there.
It took just seconds to unveil this sign, but the road to get here required years of effort.
It was a lot of letter writing, a lot of campaigning, a lot of gathering people.
Annie Putagu moved to Ottawa from Nunavut and quickly began to turn heads with her art.
It represents Inuit artists, Inuit women, and Inuit culture.
In 2006, Putagu became the first Inuk artist to win the prestigious Sobeys Art Prize. The themes of her work ranged broadly from the mundane to the horrific, her own life also filled with contrasts.
She experienced great, uplifting moments. She also struggled grappling with mental health.
The artist's body was found in the Rideau River in Ottawa in 2016. Police deemed her death suspicious at first. Then came a scandal after an officer posted racist comments saying Indigenous people are often satisfied abusing drugs and alcohol. That officer apologized. Putagu left behind a young daughter, Napachi. Now 9 years old, she took in the full scope of her mother's story today.
I like today because it's named after my mother.
Police sources have told CBC News they would be unable to pinpoint the exact cause of Putagu's death. But Napachi's adoptive father hopes the naming of the park after her starts to address other pressing issues about reconciliation.
To dedicate an Inuit space here in the national capital of a colonial government that stands in opposition to their invisibility.
A fitting legacy for an artist who always strived to portray the world around her honestly and clearly. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
One of the Canadian Football League's legendary stars, five-time Grey Cup champion Angelo Mosca, has died.
I want to thank all of Canada for giving me the opportunity in this country. I love the Hamilton fans and I sure appreciate it.
Mosca may have come from Boston, but to many he was the personification of Hamilton, playing most of his CFL years with the Tiger Cats, earning a reputation as the league's meanest player, something that served him well in his other career as a pro wrestler with the WWE. Angelo Mosca died yesterday in Hamilton. He was 83 years old. A founding member of the popular British band UB40 has died. Terence Wilson, better known by his stage name Arsenault, helped take reggae to the mainstream in the 1980s.
And it is a cliche, but it does bring people together.
Wilson sang and played trumpet for the band, including on their massive 1983 hit Red Red Wine that made UB40 a household name. They performed it live at Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday party concert in 1988. Other hits you may remember include I Got You Babe and Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Wilson was preparing to go on tour with a new band next year before his sudden death this weekend after a short illness. Terence Arsenault Wilson was 64. Next on The National, climate activists have long said flying is bad for the environment. Here at Vancouver's airport, they're taking steps to be greener.
I would like us to get to a place where we don't see aviation as the enemy.
Will it make a meaningful difference? My conversation with the head of Vancouver's airport next. Welcome back to a special edition of The National. We're coming to you from Vancouver International Airport. Quieter these days than pre-pandemic, but even now, hundreds of thousands of people travel through here every month. With air travel on the rebound, that number will keep going up. An uptick that comes with a significant cost to the climate. And with COP26 underway in Glasgow, some people believe this is the time to reassess a lot of things, including how much we travel. When it comes to global CO2 emissions, transport is a big culprit. It accounts for 16% of global emissions. Aviation is about 2% of that. Emissions per kilometre of air travel are higher than other forms of transport. That prompted demonstrations at airports yesterday across the UK and beyond, organised by a group called Stay Grounded, protesting what it calls the greenwashing of air travel. We wanted to bring you three perspectives on air travel and climate change, all trying to find what they consider the right balance. Vancouver Airport CEO describes this as a small city. She says up to 26,000 people work here. The terminal itself is the biggest single building in British Columbia. YVR had been aiming to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Now they say they've moved that target to 2030, just 9 years away.
It's the right thing to do from a community point of view, from our contribution to the economy, to support local businesses to work with us who are working towards solutions either in clean tech or lowering their own footprint.
The road to net zero includes things like switching many of YVR's vehicles to electric and more efficiently heating and cooling the terminal. But Vrooman concedes the airport is only a small part of the carbon footprint of air travel. It's those jets loaded with passengers and cargo crossing oceans and continents that generate the bulk of the emissions. So how do we balance our climate concerns with a desire to fly? In a way, COP26 is an illustration of the dilemma, drawing delegates from around the world. So we asked two environmentalists with two different views of traveling to conferences. Zipporah Berman is in Glasgow now. She chairs what's called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and was invited to COP26 by the organizers. I spoke to her before she left Vancouver.
It was a big struggle for me because right now there's no question that aviation is pretty much anyone's biggest personal carbon footprint. If you take one flight, to offset it, you would have to become vegetarian for 4 years. And so I thought long and hard about it. My family and I have restricted personal travel now for over a decade because of our concerns about climate change. But this Conference of the Parties that's starting in Glasgow next week is a critical moment in human history. We need to hold our governments to account. I think it's really important that we have representatives of civil society there, that we watchdog the process, that we encourage them to be as ambitious as possible. And then we tell the world what's happening inside those rooms.
Erica Frank has a different view. The UBC professor says even taking the stairs to our interview instead of the elevator is part of her commitment to use less energy. Her approach to air travel?
The thing that's special about flying is that in just a few hours you can eliminate anything that you tried to do for the last years in terms of being kind to the environment. The amount of damage that can be done in a few hours. Based on the data, and only based on the data, I went from a life of taking an airplane trip every month or so for work, and often also for pleasure, to one where I do so usually once a year or so. And it was because the pleasure and the professional gain that I might have gotten from doing that, it wasn't fair. There were too many people. If we're serious about calling this a climate emergency, we have to say, I'm going to make a little bit of personal sacrifice. So just to tell you a little bit about the MPH program.
A few days before our interview, Frank spoke to a group in the U.S. by video link. And she wishes COP26 delegates would do the same.
I have friends who are more serious about this, more virtuous than me about this, and who don't travel by air anymore and severely restrict their travel. But I restrict it some. I try to look for alternatives, and I try to encourage others to do the same, because it's the single most important thing that the 11% of the world who flies can do to reduce our personal carbon footprint.
As you heard, Berman agrees we should try to reduce our flights, but as a veteran of COP conferences, she says it's important to meet face to face.
If you do it on Zoom, you don't actually build trust and personal relationships, and these issues are hard. And a lot of the meetings happen behind closed doors, so it's about access. When you go to a conference of the parties, it's shocking how much access you have, because there are all the ministers just walking in the halls. There are some of the world's leading experts, economists and scientists, and everyone's together in one building. And so more gets done in that 2-week period than that gets done in the year in between. And if you're not there, then you miss out on a lot of those conversations, and you can't influence those conversations. And what happens when the negotiations and the discussions go online is that participation is very limited, and often critical voices are just left out.
As for those of us who are flying for other reasons, the aviation industry is hoping changes in technology will, over time, reduce air travel's carbon cost.
You know, Canada is a great country in so many ways. We're blessed by big geography and small population. So we need to fly in order to create the social and the economic connections, in order to move goods for trade. We need a healthy aviation sector. So I would like us to get to a place where we don't see aviation as the enemy, we see carbon. And so how do we decarbonize aviation so that there's not that same kind of trade-off? Because we need to fly, given our geography and given the size of our population. So that's why we're doing what we're doing.
So when is aviation going to become, as Vrooman described, decarbonized? Well, here's an example. Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, says by 2030, new passenger jets will be able to use 100% biofuels. That would significantly reduce emissions. But Boeing concedes a lot of work still needs to be done to increase the supply of sustainable jet fuels and reduce the cost. Still to come.
Next car, I'm going for electric car.
From the skies to the roads, electric vehicles are still hard to get. How one organization is trying to change that. Plus,
I would love to get behind the wheel of that car and drive it.
Is it possible to turn your gas car electric? One group of students thinks so, and their story is next. Welcome back to this special edition of The National from Vancouver International Airport, where journeys begin or end for thousands of people each day. As world leaders meet to discuss the climate crisis at COP26, we're looking at the critical impact of transportation. Aviation plays a role for sure, but when it comes to CO2 emissions, it is a distant second to road travel. Of the 16% of global CO2 emissions caused by transport, 12% is created by road transportation, cars and trucks. More than half of those emissions come from passenger vehicles, the cars and buses that many of us use every day. So there is an opportunity for individual action to make a big impact here, driving less or perhaps not at all, or opting for a zero-emission vehicle. Nisha Patel looks at how the electric vehicle market is doing in Canada.
Record high gas prices are hitting Canadians hard. So many at this Toronto gas station are thinking about shifting gears.
Next car, I'm going for electric car.
I like this car. If I see it in electric, I'll buy.
With the plug-in hybrid.
For Judy Goodwin, her reasons are less about economics.
I taught for many years about helping the environment and inspiring kids to be more conscious.
She's here at a Toronto nonprofit called Plug and Drive. It's a showroom where people can test drive zero-emissions vehicles and ask questions about costs and charging. Services she couldn't find at a regular car dealership.
We have found that over and over again, just that experience of trying it is what convinces people.
Kara Clareman is CEO of Plug and Drive. She says there was a lack of supply of electric cars at dealers even before the pandemic. Advocates like her are pushing for a federal mandate for dealers to keep and sell a certain number of zero-emission vehicles on the lot.
They don't want to buy it sight unseen, new technology, and they don't want to put their name on a list and wait for 6 or 12 months to get a car.
The 100% electric, zero-gas Nissan Leaf.
Though prices are coming down fast, electric cars are still more expensive than their gas counterparts.
Here in Ontario, provincial rebates were cancelled in 2018. Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Nunavut don't have rebates either. The other provinces and territories have strong programs, and the numbers show incentives work.
The federal government also offers a rebate of up to $5,000. Clean Energy Canada says that's not enough.
Keep those incentives going until there's cost parity between EVs and gas-fired vehicles. But I would encourage them to target those incentives at low-income families.
At the UN Climate Change Summit, the Prime Minister reiterated Canada's goal to sell only zero-emission vehicles by 2035. Right now, electric cars make up just 4% of car sales. But back at Plug and Drive,
virtually everyone says EVs, that's the future. But what we try to tell people is, yes, of course it is, but it's also right now, and you don't have to wait.
And Judy Goodwin says she's ready to buy an electric car if she can find one. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Right now, electric vehicles are out of reach for many Canadians, but a group of students at the University of Calgary has a unique solution. They're transforming some old classics into climate-friendly electric cars. Nick Purdon takes a closer look.
When we're able to finish this car, it'll just mean that we're one step closer to solving the world's climate problem.
Meet Ratik Kapoor. In this underground garage in Calgary, he believes he can help save the world.
I am very passionate about solving the climate problem. I think it's super important that our generation takes on the problem head on and doesn't try to just skirt around and figure out we could do this in the future, we might be able to do that in the future. I think we need action now, and it definitely needs to be done.
Taking action here means a group of young people converting this 1966 Volvo into a fully electric car.
This is only the inner fender.
But electric cars are now being built all over the world.
As long as you can get access to it, then we can pop this off.
How is saving this old clunker going to help with climate change?
Oh, wait, what?
So the problem with electric cars right now is they're just not as affordable. So what we're doing is we're dropping the price and taking old scrap stuff and transforming it into what we need for our car so that one day others will be able to do the same and more of us can afford electric cars.
So that would just plug into like a USB for a computer.
That's why these University of Calgary engineering students are determined to drag this car from the 60s into the present.
It could have, but now then we have to find a new spot for it because we can't put anything along.
Well, this is structural. This is solid.
The team has already replaced the old gas engine.
This is only the.
What you see there is an electric motor.
Well, the junction box will be an issue because
Today, Kaylin Cameron is working on the brakes.
it's super fun. It comes with its own set of challenges every time that we work on it. If we extend it, we can get access at the front, but then we need to make sure that everything's really tight to the bottom of the car because we can't.
Kaylin is trying to figure out how to install the brakes now that the internal combustion engine isn't there anymore.
We only have limited access to manuals that are from 1962 or 64 or anything in between. And there's always a small little parts that we need to fix or replace that wasn't compatible between a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle.
So I'm just working on removing the center console here. So we're going to 3D print a piece here to make this look a little bit more sleek. And
Chase Mowat tells me that by working here, he's come to realize that this Volvo is much more than a car.
I feel very proud. I feel very lucky to be on a team like this. It feels very, very rewarding to be part of something I think that's probably bigger than myself.
They want to redesign a lot, but I think for them.
That's really the sentiment of everyone here.
We could, because there's on the other one right down here that we could attach to.
They're committed. They've put in months of work, thousands of hours, all on their own time.
So I'm just testing the distance and just seeing if I get closer than 20 centimeters, you'll see it says it gives me an error.
One of the leaders here is Kamila Abdrazakov. It's not lost on her that as they work on the car, the world's leaders are meeting once again to try to solve the climate crisis.
I feel like there's just been so much talk about climate change. It's always talk. It's always we need to do something. We should do something. And nobody ends up doing anything. And so I'm really happy that we are at a stage where we are doing something. It's not just talking for us. We're constantly in the garage here working, making a difference, and that's what matters really.
And then, so if we follow that along here.
So we actually took out the dash, as you can see
nice,
here.
okay.
Camilla says for the project to be successful, it isn't enough to just electrify this old car.
We had like some bottle holders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To really have an impact on climate change, they need people to buy into their idea and want to drive cars like this one.
So this is our infotainment system.
That's why the team is modernizing the Volvo,
Rethinking some of the different aspects of our design.
complete with cutting-edge sound system and climate control.
All right, we can check out the other battery box.
Yes.
Ratik tells me that if it weren't for COVID, the car would be done. Now that they're able to work on it again, he can see the finish line.
I would love to get behind the wheel of that car and drive it. As soon as we have it in a drivable state, I hope I'm the first one to take it out for a spin and show that, like, even though this is like an old 1960s car, we converted it to an electric, and it's capable of doing exactly what the other cars on the road are capable of doing. And at the end of the day, yes, people want to drive this.
Yeah. Other than that, it's looking pretty solid.
Yeah.
This car is being reborn out of the climate crisis. And these young people work as hard as they can on it to help save their planet.
I think that it was just attached right here, right?
But Camilla, even at 20, says her focus is not only on herself.
Yeah, that could work, that could work.
Slap it right there.
When I have kids, I want to be able to tell them that I was part of the solution to climate change, not that I just sat around, did nothing. It's so easy to be overwhelmed that it can be hard to start to make a difference, to just, take that one step. And I think this is a huge step. So I'm incredibly proud to be here, and I'm very excited for what the future holds for us.
Nick Purdon, CBC News, Calgary.
Next, the pandemic has reconnected a retired naval architect with his lifelong passion.
I've sailed every year of my life since I was like 15 years old.
This seasoned sailor's quest back to the water is our moment. Right after this. Mike Waters built his first boat when he was just 12. The Montrealer thought he'd built his last at the age of 78, but during the pandemic, this retired naval architect's passion resurfaced. At 87 years old, he built his latest boat, aptly named the Corona, as in coronavirus, and on Wednesday it made its debut on the St. Lawrence River. The launch of his latest passion project is tonight's moment.
I normally would be sailing down in Vermont, but I couldn't cross the border, so I thought, well, I'm going to be the whole summer without the ability to go sailing, and I've sailed every year of my life since I was like 15 years old or something. So I decided to get occupied with building another boat. My last boat I started at 78 years old, and I really figured that would be my last one, but it was a boat specifically designed for my retirement, and it would make me happy for my last days. Normally when I build a new boat, I don't give it a name right away. I wait until the boat shows character to me. But of course, in this case, it all came out of coronavirus, so it was a natural name. It had to be called Corona.
And so he made it for a friend who decided that the friend didn't want it, couldn't use it. He went away, I guess, during the pandemic. And so he's hanging on to that boat and not quite sure what he's going to do with it. It's made of plywood, fiberglass, and epoxy, not a single screw aboard. Looks really nice. That is the National for November the 7th. Good night.